kill all the diseased animals on this land. Who gave you permission to raise them? You're ruining the neighborhood's view." That was the piercing voice of Karen, the HOA president, echoing across my family's 150-year-old ranch, as she marched in like a dictator flanked by 5 armed hunters. She waved a pile of enforcement orders like they were royal decrees, announcing me as a threat to the community. She truly believed her authority extended even onto my private land. But what she didn't know was that hidden on this peaceful stretch of soil was something that could flip her world upside down and turn her into the focus of a manhunt no one would ever forget. And once it started, the hunted wouldn't be my animals. Where are you watching from? Comment now, because what's coming next is going to be so shocking, it'll feel like karma in its rawest form. The day had started like any other calm Tuesday. At Morrison Ranch, I was feeding my Rhode Island Reds, beautiful heritage chickens pecking through the dirt on the same land that had been in my family for 5 generations. It still felt surreal that a software engineer, more used to chasing down lines of broken code, had inherited a living piece of American farm legacy. My grandfather passed last year and left me this 40-acre ranch, and honestly, I was still juggling how to manage both the bugs in my programs and the rhythm of farm life. The chickens didn't care about software updates, and my laptop couldn't care less about feeding time. Then, at exactly 7:03 a.m., I heard tires crunching over the gravel of my driveway. Not one vehicle, but 3 sleek black SUVs rolling in with precision like a government operation. My first thought, maybe some lost wedding guests or tourists from Highland Estates, the luxury development that had slowly swallowed up the countryside around us over the past 5 years. But then I saw her. Margaret Blackwood emerged from the lead vehicle in a spotless white blazer, radiating the energy of someone who thought she ran the entire county. Right behind her came 5 heavily armed men in dressed head to toe in hunting gear, bright orange vests, camo jackets, and rifles slung casually across their shoulders. The 5 men looked like they'd stepped out of a backwoods hunting catalog and into a legal dispute. The whole scene was so ridiculous, I couldn't help but let out a disbelieving laugh. Who on earth brings armed hunters to a property disagreement? But Margaret Blackwood, unfazed by the mud or the absurdity, stormed toward me with laser precision, her high heels slicing through the barnyard sludge like she was gliding on marble. "Mr. Morrison, I presume," she said, not so much asking as declaring. Her voice was a cocktail of smug authority and cold entitlement, the kind you only perfect after decades of bossing people around. "I'm Margaret Blackwood, president of the Highland Estates Homeowners Association, and I'm here to inform you that your little farming operation ends today." With the flair of a TV prosecutor, she slapped a manila folder against my chest, hard enough that someone less braced might have stumbled back. "These are official enforcement orders," she said. "Your property violates numerous community standards, poses health hazards, and is dragging down the property values of the entire neighborhood." As I flipped open the folder, something immediately struck me, as off the letterhead looked convincing at first glance. But the seal at the bottom wasn't from our county, city, or even the state. It belonged to a private arbitration firm with a name and address that meant absolutely nothing to me. I kept my voice calm. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your HOA has no jurisdiction here. This ranch has been here for 145 years longer than your gated community has even existed." Her smile didn't budge. It was the kind of smile you'd expect from someone out to fire you, not negotiate. "Mr. Morrison," she said icily, "you clearly don't grasp the seriousness of your situation. These gentlemen," she motioned to the hunters, "are licensed wildlife management specialists. They're here to eliminate the diseased animals threatening our community's health and safety." One of them, a burly man with leathery skin and eyes like dull glass, stepped forward. "Nothing personal, son," he said gruffly. "But we've got direct orders to clear this land of livestock. Best not to get in our way." And that's when I saw it, something so chilling. It made the back of my neck prickle with dread. The man stood squarely in front of my barn's security camera, angling his broad frame and body cam with surgical precision to block its view. It wasn't a coincidence. He knew exactly where my surveillance system was positioned, and he'd moved deliberately to obstruct it. That's when I knew something wasn't right. "Hold on just a minute," I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record. "No one's firing a single shot on my land without showing me proper permits, credentials, and some kind of legal basis for being here." Margaret's expression twitched, just for a second, a flicker of annoyance that she quickly masked with her usual smug professionalism. "Mr. Morrison," she said, smoothing her tone into something patronizing, "I understand you're frustrated, but your property has been flagged for numerous violations. And frankly, there are significant investors, very important investors, who are interested in acquiring land in this area for future development." She waved her hand in a wide arc, gesturing at my chickens, my hand-built vegetable beds, and the century-old red barn that had withstood tornadoes, blizzards, and even a lightning strike back in 1964. "Your rustic lifestyle is standing in the way of legitimate economic progress," she added, like I was some bumpkin roadblock to civilization. "We're prepared to offer you a generous settlement for relocation, far more generous than what you'll get after legal proceedings force the sale." But as she talked, I noticed something odd. Her eyes kept drifting again and again toward a patch of land beside my grandfather's old garage. It wasn't the kind of idle glance someone gives out of curiosity. It was deliberate, like she was checking on something ... or someone. And that's when I saw it. Her sleek leather handbag was unzipped just enough to reveal a folded map inside, not a satellite printout. Not something scraped off Google Earth, but a meticulously hand-drawn blueprint. The paper was worn, the lines made in pencil and ink, with markings for every barn, shed, and utility line on my land, and even spots I'd never explored. It detailed outbuildings hidden deep in the trees and remote corners not visible from the road or even my own farmhouse windows. My stomach dropped. Some of those places were spots my grandfather had always told me to leave alone, said they were just filled with rusted tools and useless junk. "That's an interesting map you've got there," I said, nodding subtly toward her bag, every muscle in my body now tense with suspicion. "Did you conduct a private survey of my land?" I asked, my tone sharper now. Margaret's hand shot to her purse, snapping it shut with a loud defensive click. "I don't know what you're insinuating," she said, her voice brittle. "But we conduct thorough research on all properties that impact community standards." Still, The color had drained from her face, and a tiny muscle in her jaw was twitching uncontrollably. Gone was the polished HOA president mask. In its place, something colder, more calculated. "Listen, Mr. Morrison," she continued, her tone sharpening like a blade. "You can cooperate and leave peacefully, or you can dig in and lose everything. This land will be developed, whether you agree or not. There are forces involved here, far beyond your nostalgic attachment to this rundown farm." Behind her, the so-called wildlife specialists were getting fidgety, checking their watches and sharing subtle glances. Men on a schedule, not a mission of community health. Without warning, Margaret pulled a business card from her blazer and held it out like a warning notice. "You have 48 hours to contact our legal team and discuss your options. After that, enforcement escalates." And with that, she turned on her heel, and the convoy of SUVs rumbled off in a haze of dust and gravel, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. The whole thing felt unreal, like a bad thriller with a script that hit a little too close to home. But it was the small details that crawled under my skin and refused to leave. Why had she brought hunters instead of legal counsel? Why did she carry a map so intimate and specific when she was supposedly seeing my ranch for the first time? And why, above all, did that one hunter know the blind spot in my security system without hesitation? I glanced down at the business card, now trembling between my fingers. Below Margaret Blackwood's name and the Highland Estates logo was a phone number, area code unfamiliar. But what really made my blood run cold was the fine print at the bottom. In partnership with Blackwood Development Solutions. Not Highland Estates. Blackwood Development Solutions. This was never about community standards or supposed health code violations. This was about someone who wanted my land badly enough to fake an HOA, fabricate legal threats, and bring in armed men to scare me into submission. As I stood there watching the SUVs vanish behind the trees, a chilling realization crept in, one that would shadow the rest of my day. When Margaret had looked toward my grandfather's garage, she wasn't just checking a reference point on a map. She looked at it with the recognition of someone who had already been there. It was a look of familiarity, not curiosity. And in that moment, it hit me. This wasn't some spontaneous land grab. Whatever was happening had been set in motion long before her visit this morning. The real question was, what exactly did Margaret Blackwood know about my family's land that I didn't? How did she have a hand-drawn map of my property so precise it showed buildings and trails even I hadn't seen? Why was I, the legal owner, in the dark about parts of my own inheritance? That question clung to me like a storm cloud as I tried to go about my usual remote work from the ranch house. But every time I looked out the window toward the garage, I felt the pull of something hidden, something long buried that someone was clearly trying to reclaim or erase. Growing up, my grandfather had always waved off my questions about certain areas on the property with vague phrases like "just junk" or "nothing worth your time." But now, after Margaret's eerie behavior and the way her eyes locked onto that garage, those dismissals felt less like absent-minded shrugs and more like carefully crafted misdirection. I knew it was time to start digging not in the soil, but through the history he left behind. I climbed up into the attic of the main house where he'd stored decades of paperwork in dusty file boxes. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: feed bills, crop yield reports, and tax documents dating back to the 60s. But under a pile of weathered receipts from the 1990s, I found a sealed manila envelope that stopped me cold. It was labeled, in fading ink, Federal Service Records, Confidential. Inside were documents that shattered the image of the man I thought I knew. My grandfather, Harold Morrison, hadn't been just a humble rancher. He'd served 23 years in the FBI, specializing in witness protection and covert safe house logistics. His official retirement letter was dated 15 years ago, but buried among the files were other records, recent ones, hinting that he had never truly stopped working. That's when I realized whatever was hidden on this ranch wasn't just personal. It was classified well into his 70s. My grandfather had apparently never slowed down, not even close. One letter, stamped with an official FBI letterhead and dated just 6 months before his death, mentioned ongoing security protocols for something called Site 7 and emphasized the need to maintain operational readiness for asset protection. Site 7. The words echoed in my mind as I stared out across the land, realizing I had no idea what secrets might be buried beneath my own soil. I reread the files, and each page seemed to raise more questions than answers. There were invoices for advanced surveillance equipment I'd never seen installed, technical blueprints outlining underground storage structures, and most unsettling of all, a list of cleared federal personnel with access to the property. Margaret Blackwood's name wasn't on that list, but one name stood out: M. Grant, next to a note stating their access had been permanently revoked 3 years ago. I needed legal advice fast, and thankfully I knew just the person: Emma Rodriguez, my old college study partner who'd gone on to become a powerhouse attorney while I got swallowed by the tech industry. After returning to our hometown, she'd built a reputation as the go-to expert for property disputes and small-town legal drama. Smart, meticulous, and deeply familiar with how local politics operated, Emma was the exact kind of ally I needed. When I called her, she didn't hesitate, said she'd be out by that afternoon. "Jake, you look like hell," she said as she stepped out of her Honda Civic, dressed in a fitted blazer paired with rugged hiking boots, business on top, field ready below. "This whole situation's got me twisted," I admitted, walking her toward the house. "I think my grandfather left me more than just a piece of family land." Once inside, I spread out the federal documents on the dining table, watching as Emma's confident demeanor shifted into something more serious. Almost alarmed. "Your grandfather was federal law enforcement?" she asked, scanning the seal on an official-looking certificate. "Why didn't you ever mention that?" I shook my head. "He never talked about it. Said he did some government consulting before retiring to the farm." I figured it was something boring: agriculture inspections or food supply logistics. But now it was clear. He wasn't inspecting crops. He was hiding something. Emma picked up the list of cleared personnel, scanning the names with sharp, practiced eyes that missed nothing. "Jake, some of these people are listed with addresses in other states. This wasn't just a ranch, it was a federal site, possibly a safe house network or a long-term surveillance post." Her finger stopped on one line, her brow furrowing. "Look at this: Margaret Blackwood is listed here under the alias Mum Grant. She had official access to your property until it was revoked 3 years ago." My chest tightened. "That's no coincidence," She tried to buy the ranch from my grandfather years ago. Offered him nearly 3 times its market value. He turned her down flat, I said, remembering the detail Emma had brought up in our earlier call. And that's where it gets more disturbing, she added, flipping open her notebook. I dug into Highland Estates like you asked. Margaret didn't just move in 2 years ago and ease into leadership. She came in with a plan. She immediately purchased 3 adjoining lots under shell companies and then methodically pressured or outmaneuvered the original HOA board members. Within 6 months, she'd appointed herself president and launched what residents describe as a ruthless community improvement initiative. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they painted wasn't just suspicious, it was deeply calculated. She didn't stumble into power, I said, my voice low with realization. She came here with one goal: get this land. There's more, Emma said, opening her laptop and pulling up a series of documents from the county property records. Take a look at this. Highland Estates was originally developed by a company called Morrison Development Group. My blood ran cold. Morrison? You think that's connected to my family? I'd bet money on it, she said. But here's the kicker. In the earliest development plans filed 5 years ago, your ranch was already included as part of the proposed expansion. Someone intended from the start to fold your land into the subdivision even before your grandfather passed away. The weight of it hit me like a punch to the gut. My family's ranch, which I'd believed to be a quiet inheritance of soil, sweat, and memory, had been a target in a hidden agenda years in the making. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my inheritance in this land, was being pulled out from under me. My grandfather would have never sold to developers, I muttered. Not in a million years, Emma gave me a thoughtful look. Maybe he didn't know. Or maybe that's exactly why he kept his FBI connections active. She pointed to another letter, dated 2 years ago. Look at this. It's from Blackwood Development Solutions, offering to purchase any Morrison family holdings for an undisclosed sum. And here's the kicker. It wasn't sent to any realtor or public contact. It was addressed directly to your grandfather. That made my skin crawl. As Emma began organizing her notes, I felt drawn toward the old stone garage, the same one Margaret had been eyeing with such unnatural interest. It had always been a strange structure, older than the house itself, with unusually thick walls and a foundation that seemed like overkill for a tool shed. As I approached, I noticed something else, an electronic keypad lock on the door, clearly a recent addition. On instinct, I punched in my grandfather's birthday, April 5th, 10th, 1934. The lock gave a soft beep and disengaged. Inside, it looked like any rural garage. His old Ford pickup, shelves lined with tools and grease-stained rags. But along the far wall, partly concealed behind old storage bins, was something that stopped me cold: a built-in safe, flush with it. The stone, its metal surface painted to match the wall. Emma had followed me in and gasped when she saw it. Jake, that's not just a farm safe, that's military-grade hardware. You don't install one of those unless you're protecting state secrets, or people. I stepped closer and tried the same code, my grandfather's birthday. Another soft click. The door creaked open, revealing the most jaw-dropping contents I'd seen yet. An active FBI identification card with my grandfather's name and photograph, still marked as valid. A complete, hand-labeled map of underground facilities beneath. The ranch property. And a thick packet of safe house protocols that included encrypted emergency contact steps, contingency evacuation routes, and a category labeled Asset Protection Procedures, High-Value Targets. At the very bottom was a simple white business card, Special Agent Sarah Chun, scribbled on the back. In my grandfather's unmistakably neat handwriting was a note that would change the course of everything. If anything happens to me, trust Sarah. She knows what this place really is. For Jake, when the time comes, trust no one else. That final line, handwritten with careful precision on the back of Special Agent Sarah Chen's business card, made my throat go dry. Emma picked up the FBI contact badge again, studying it like it might unlock answers all by itself. "Jake, this isn't expired," she said slowly, flipping it over. "Your grandfather maintained active federal credentials up until the day he died. He wasn't just retired, he was still in it." Before I could fully register the weight of that statement, my phone buzzed in my hand. The screen flashed an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. My gut twisted as I answered, the kind of dread that feels like standing on the edge of a cliff you never knew was there. "Mr. Morrison," a voice said, calm, sharp, and unmistakably federal. "This is Special Agent Sarah Chun, FBI. We've been expecting your call for quite some time." My heart pounded. They had been waiting for me. That meant my grandfather had set all this in motion long before I had any clue what was coming. I stood frozen as the silence stretched. Finally, I managed to speak. "Agent Chun, I think there's been some kind of mistake." "I just found my grandfather's." "There's no mistake," she cut in gently but firmly. "Your grandfather briefed us thoroughly. We knew you'd find the documents eventually. I'm approximately 30 minutes from your location. Please stay put. And whatever you do, don't let anyone else into that garage until I arrive." The call ended abruptly, the line going dead before I could respond. I just stood there, staring at the phone like it might self-destruct, the words echoing in my head. "Don't let anyone else into that garage." Emma was watching me now, her expression shifting from concern to something deeper, something that said this had officially moved far beyond property law. Her eyes met mine, steady and serious. "Jake, what exactly did your grandfather get involved in?" "Jake, what exactly did your grandfather do for the FBI?" Emma asked, her voice low and cautious, but all I could do was shake my head. I didn't know, not really, but I was about to find out. 30 minutes later, right on schedule, an unmarked black sedan pulled into the driveway with quiet precision. It was the kind of vehicle that screamed government issue without saying a word. Agent Sarah Chun stepped out, younger than I expected, early 40s maybe, but with a presence that radiated competence and control. Her eyes were sharp, observant, and full of the kind of calm you only see in people who've dealt with chaos and walked out the other side intact. She wore a tailored gray suit and moved with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. "Mr. Morrison, Miss Rodriguez," she said, nodding respectfully to Emma after checking her credentials. "Thank you for waiting. I know this is a lot to take in, but your grandfather left very specific instructions about what you needed to know once the right time came." She motioned toward the garage. "May I?" We led her back inside, where she studied the open safe with cool, practiced efficiency. Harold Morrison wasn't just a field agent, she began, pulling a thick folder from her briefcase. He was one of our most trusted deep-cover operatives. For more than 2 decades, he ran what we classify as a Tier 1 safe house operation, high value, long-term, and strategically isolated. This ranch wasn't just a retirement project. It was an active federal asset. She flipped open the file, revealing dense documents and official photographs. Your grandfather used this property to protect high-value witnesses, critical federal assets, and occasionally to secure sensitive evidence tied to major investigations. We're talking about people connected to organized crime families, transnational laundering networks, and high-level government corruption cases. I tried to absorb what she was saying, glancing around the same space where I used to play with toy tractors and help clean tools as a kid. "Witnesses?" I asked, stunned. "This place? Sheltered witnesses?" "Over 200 during his active years," Agent Chen replied without hesitation. "After retirement, he maintained it as a contingency facility. In emergencies, when a primary location was compromised, we could quietly relocate individuals here. Everything about this ranch was engineered to look like a quiet, aging piece of farmland. But under the surface, it's one of the most secure black sites the Bureau ever used." She laid out photographs that looked like they were taken from security footage and aerial surveillance images of the ranch lit up with infrared, delivery logs, and even entry logs from names I'd never seen before. It was the same land I'd grown up visiting, but suddenly, it looked like something out of a classified dossier. The images Agent Chun laid out on the table painted a version of the ranch I never knew existed, hidden beneath the weathered barns and dusty pastures were layers of security infrastructure straight out of a classified military site. Thermal sensors camouflaged as fence posts, reinforced underground bunkers with hidden access points, and living quarters buried beneath the barn features so seamlessly integrated into the ranch's rustic aesthetic that even someone who'd grown up visiting it would never suspect what lay beneath. "The woman you know as Margaret Blackwood," Agent Chen said, her tone sharpening, "is actually Melissa Grant, a high-level financial criminal specializing in international money laundering. She's been on our radar for over 3 years." I glanced at Emma, whose brow furrowed as her legal instincts took hold. "You're saying Highland Estates is just a front? A money laundering hub?" "Not the residents," Chun clarified quickly. "Most of the families there are innocent. It's the development itself, the financing structure, the construction contracts, the shell corporations tied to landscaping and maintenance. Everything about it was designed to wash illicit funds through what appears to be legitimate suburban growth." She unfurled another map, this one color-coded with various parcels marked in red, yellow, and green. "Melissa has been purchasing properties surrounding your ranch for the past 2 years using a web of overseas accounts and corporate aliases. But your land is different. She needs it, not just wants it, because it holds something she's been searching for." Her expression darkened. "Your grandfather wasn't just protecting witnesses. He was safeguarding federal evidence materials. Too sensitive, too dangerous, or too valuable to store in standard facilities. The bunkers beneath this ranch contain a trove of classified case assets, documents, hard drives, physical contraband, financial ledgers, and, in some instances, recovered assets that could destabilize criminal networks if they ever got into the wrong hands. I felt like I was slipping deeper into a world I was never meant to see, like Alice falling through layers of national security and long-buried secrets. "So, what exactly are we talking about?" I asked, trying to make sense of it all. "Hidden financial records?" Chun nodded. "Yes, and more. Physical evidence from major cases, blackmail materials, unreleased testimony, and, in at least 2 cases, items tied to international corruption investigations. This isn't just a ranch anymore, Mr. Morrison. It's a vault. And Melissa Grant has been trying to crack it open from the outside for years." Investigation? Absolutely not, without full legal protections, oversight, and a formal agreement in writing. Emma's voice was sharp, her stance firm as she positioned herself between me and Agent Chen, but I wasn't hearing her, not fully. My focus was locked on the safe, the memories of my grandfather, and the sudden clarity of what this place really was. Agent Chun raised both hands in a calming gesture. "Of course, any cooperation would involve official documentation, legal protections under federal law, and full transparency. No one's asking Mr. Morrison to move forward without safeguards." She turned back to me. "But I am asking if you're willing to take the first step. Your grandfather built this place for a reason, because he believed in protecting people even when no one else could. He believed in shielding the truth from the shadows trying to bury it." The garage was quiet again, save for the distant cluck of chickens and the soft hum of wind outside the stone walls. I thought of the hand-drawn maps, the evidence sealed beneath my feet, and the long, lonely work my grandfather must have done to keep this place hidden. I thought of Melissa Grant Margaret Blackwood standing on my land with a map she shouldn't have, trying to bully me into giving up something she clearly didn't understand. "If I say yes," I asked slowly, "what happens next?" Chun met my gaze. "We reinforce the perimeter. We quietly bring in surveillance tech. We keep your daily life as normal as possible while we monitor for Melissa's next move. She's not done, Jake. She'll come back, she always does. But this time, she'll walk straight into our trap." Emma didn't look thrilled, but she also didn't interrupt. Her silence meant she was already strategizing. "Then yes," I said, straightening up. "I'll do it. I'll help bring her down." Agent Chun gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good, then let's get to work. We've got a lot to prepare, and not much time. Before, you'll need to vacate the premises while we conduct a full inspection," he added, already signaling to a pair of animal control officers heading toward my chicken coop. Margaret stood nearby, arms crossed and smiling just enough for the cameras, like a villain who'd learned to weaponize bureaucracy. But I wasn't the same man I'd been 2 days ago. I didn't panic. I didn't plead. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began recording. "Everyone here is being documented," I said loudly, "and this property is part of an ongoing federal investigation." That was the moment Agent Chun stepped forward from the shadows of my porch, flashing her badge with a smoothness that turned heads instantly. "Federal Agent Sarah Chun, FBI. All county and municipal activity on this property is to cease immediately. Any further actions without coordination with the Bureau will be considered obstruction of justice." The entire circus seemed to freeze. The health inspector stammered, The news crew lowered their cameras slightly, and even Margaret Melissa lost her smug expression for a split second. "You don't have jurisdiction to stop a local inspection," she said, voice tight. Chun didn't blink. "Actually, I do. Mr. Morrison's property is classified as a federal interest site as of yesterday, and your actions today constitute a direct attempt to interfere with protected evidence. I suggest you and your entourage leave now." The standoff felt like it stretched for hours, but in truth, it lasted barely a minute. One by one, the vehicles began to turn around. The cameras stopped rolling, and Margaret, no longer bothering to fake civility, shot me a look filled with pure venom. "You've made a powerful enemy," she hissed. I met her glare without flinching. "So have you." As she drove away, the last of her circus in tow, Agent Chun turned to me. "That was only the beginning. She just played her legal card. Next time, it'll be something darker. We need to move quickly." And as I looked around at the property, I thought I knew. I realized I was now deep in a war one never asked for, but one I couldn't walk away from. Just as I stepped outside, a woman from animal control was already making her way toward my chicken coops, confidently carrying what looked like testing equipment and moving like someone who'd memorized the layout of my land. "Ma'am, you need a warrant to be on my property," I said firmly, but she held up an official-looking document designed to intimidate enough to fool anyone who didn't know legal jargon. "This is an emergency public health order, sir," she said coolly. "We're authorized to inspect any property that presents an immediate risk to community safety." It all felt suspiciously well coordinated, like Margaret had meticulously orchestrated this entire morning's ambush, with its precisely timed arrivals and officials who seemed oddly familiar with every inch of my property. The reporter, who introduced himself as Alex Chun from Channel 7, had the eager expression of someone hungry for a scandal. "Mr. Morrison, can you comment on allegations that your farming operation violates several health codes and endangers nearby residential areas?" he asked, holding a mic in my face while his cameraman recorded what probably looked like a cornered man scrambling for defense. I replied as calmly as I could, "I can comment that this is nothing short of harassment," trying to keep my composure while everything around me screamed setup. I reminded them that county officials had inspected my land multiple times over the years without ever citing a single violation. Yet, right on cue, Inspector Williams emerged from the coop with a clipboard thick with notes and an exaggerated look of bureaucratic worry. "Mr. Morrison," he said loud enough for the camera mics to catch, "I'm seeing several code violations: improper waste disposal, inadequate animal shelters, and potential groundwater contamination." Then Margaret appeared, almost theatrically, stepping between me and the camera like she'd been rehearsing this for months. "This is exactly the kind of situation Highland Estates residents have been worried about," she said, her voice perfectly balancing civic duty and grave concern, like someone who had waited her whole life for this performance. "We're not trying to interfere with anyone's livelihood," Margaret declared, her voice smooth and calculated, "but we do have a duty to protect our families and preserve property values from operations that blatantly ignore basic health and safety regulations." With a polished wave of her hand, she motioned toward the reporter as though directing a scene she'd rehearsed dozens of times, effortlessly stepping into the media spotlight with the confidence of someone who thrived there. "Mr. Chun, you're..." Viewers should know this property has been under scrutiny for months, flagged repeatedly for violations, yet local officials have hesitated to act, likely due to political pressure and the kind of rural favoritism that often places agricultural interests above community safety. Just as the pressure threatened to become overwhelming, a familiar sound cut through the tension, the unmistakable hum of Emma Rodriguez's Honda Civic pulling into the driveway. She stepped out with sharp determination, every movement broadcasting the arrival of a seasoned lawyer ready for battle. "Excuse me," she announced in a commanding courtroom voice that sliced through the chaos like a gavel, instantly shifting the entire atmosphere. "I'm Emma Rodriguez, legal counsel for Mr. Morrison and this property. Inspector Williams, I need to see your warrant, along with the specific complaints that led to this inspection and the legal basis for your actions." The inspector faltered, thumbing nervously through his papers, clearly caught off guard by someone who actually knew the law and wasn't afraid to enforce it. "Ma'am, this is a public health emergency. In cases like this, we're authorized to act without a warrant," he stammered. Emma didn't flinch. "Then you'd better have thorough documentation backing every one of these allegations," she said, coolly pulling out her own clipboard and pen, the tools of someone used to dismantling flimsy authority with precision. For a moment, Margaret's unwavering composure cracked, her face betraying just a flicker of doubt, but she quickly regrouped, obviously having anticipated legal resistance as part of her master plan. "Miss Rodriguez," she said, her voice adopting a tone of forced diplomacy, "I'm sure Mr. Morrison is grateful for your assistance, but community safety must come first. We've gathered extensive records of complaints from residents regarding foul odors, pest infestations, and severe property value decline." With the flair of someone laying down a trump card, she handed Emma a thick folder brimming with printed grievances, her smile betraying the confidence of someone who believed they'd already won. "Filed through official legal channels," Margaret declared smugly, but Emma was already a step ahead. As she flipped through the folder with sharp, deliberate focus, her eyes narrowed, not with concern, but with the quiet satisfaction of a lawyer who had just uncovered a crucial flaw in her opponent's case. "Margaret," she said, her voice calm but cutting, "these complaints are certainly interesting. Every single one was filed within the same 2-hour window yesterday afternoon. That's unusually precise timing for what you're calling spontaneous public concern." The growing crowd drawn by the spectacle began murmuring, and I noticed some familiar faces from the Highland Estates community watching intently. Dorothy Walsh, the kind elderly neighbor who always offered a friendly wave during her evening walks, stood by her car, her expression skeptical. Near her, Maria Santos and her teenage son, who often helped me with fence repairs in exchange for fresh eggs, stood in quiet solidarity, their presence grounding me amid the chaos. But Margaret wasn't finished. Noticing the gathering residents, she seized the moment like a seasoned performer stepping into her spotlight. "You see," she proclaimed, her voice raised for both the reporter and the neighbors, "the community is concerned. People are here because they understand this property poses a real threat to everything we've worked so hard to build in Highland Estates." Her tone was rich with feigned conviction, designed to stir fear and rally support, but then the scene took an unexpected turn that clearly wasn't part of her tightly choreographed plan. Dorothy stepped forward, her voice steady and firm. filled with the weight of experience and the no-nonsense honesty of someone immune to political posturing. "Margaret, I've lived next to this farm for 4 years. I've never smelled anything worse than the usual farm smells that come with the territory. My property value hasn't dropped, it's gone up. And I'd take a real working farm over another row of empty storefronts or paved parking lots any day." A few people nodded in agreement, and I saw Margaret's confident expression falter ever so slightly. Meanwhile, Emma continued to apply pressure, each legal question chipping away at the flimsy foundation of the so-called inspection. But as I stood there, temporarily buoyed by the support and Emma's tactical defense, a chilling realization crept in. The animal control officer had moved through my property with uncanny precision, heading directly toward hidden water sources that weren't visible from public paths. The health inspector, too, had gone straight to isolated sections of my land, bypassing areas they would have had to search for unless someone had already provided them with a detailed layout visible from the road or even accessible without prior knowledge, and yet the officials navigated straight to them with unsettling ease. Margaret, meanwhile, kept glancing at her watch like she was counting down to a moment only she knew about. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about embarrassing me or applying legal pressure. The real purpose of today's chaos was to use the media spectacle and official distraction as cover for something far more calculated. When I saw her give a subtle nod toward an official lingering near my grandfather's old garage place that held personal family history and sensitive documents, I realized the actual attack was just getting underway. My name is Jason Miller, and I live in Chicago. I write scripts for Harper Stories, and while this version still has its flaws, I hope viewers will share their thoughts in the comments below. But just when I thought I had a full grasp of Margaret's plan, the story took a sharp and completely unexpected turn. A battered old Honda Accord rolled up the driveway, completely out of place among the sleek news vans and official vehicles. And out stepped a young man in his late 20s, dressed casually in jeans and a worn college sweatshirt, his body language radiating anxiety and uncertainty. He scanned the crowd, then locked eyes with Margaret, and I watched, stunned, as her polished composure shattered instantly. "Hello, Mother," he said clearly, loudly enough for the cameras to catch every word. Or should I say Margaret? I honestly can't keep up with your names anymore. The transformation on her face was extraordinary: shock, fear, rage. And finally something resembling guilt flickered across her expression before she forced herself into a weak version of her usual calm. "David, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely audible, drained of its usual authority. "You told me you never wanted to see me again." The young man, David Blackwood, if that was indeed his real name, pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket and held it up like a weapon. "I changed my mind when I found out what you were really doing here," he said, turning to the crowd and the still recording news cameras. "When I realized you were still destroying people's lives for money." The moment he spoke those words, the reporter's instincts kicked in. Sensing the scope of the story had just exploded beyond health code violations, he quickly shifted angles to frame the unfolding family bombshell, now captivating a community that had gathered for a simple zoning dispute. "David, please don't do this here," Margaret pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. But David was already pulling open the manila envelope, revealing what looked like official documents and a series of photographs that immediately grabbed the attention of everyone present. "You vanished from my life 10 years ago," he said, his voice raw and trembling, yet loud enough for everyone, including the news cameras and officials, to hear. "I had just started college. One day, I came home to an empty house, a note on the kitchen table saying you had to leave for my safety, and nothing else." He paused, scanning the crowd until his gaze locked onto the camera lens, his next words detonating like a bomb. "What I didn't know was that my mother had faked her own death and assumed a new identity to escape federal investigators. She was running from fraud charges, money laundering investigations, and even a murder case." The word murder hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, and I watched as the gathered neighbors physically recoiled, stepping back from Margaret in stunned silence, forming a wary circle around her like she was radioactive. Emma instinctively moved closer to me, her posture stiff and alert, her legal instincts sensing a seismic shift in everything we thought we understood about this situation. "David, you don't understand," Margaret said, her voice no longer commanding but broken and rushed, as though she was trying to catch up with a truth she could no longer control. "Everything I did for us. Your stepfather, he betrayed me. He was going to steal everything we had, leave us with nothing after everything we built together." Her words tumbled out faster and faster, an unraveling narrative of fear and bitterness. "I grew up with nothing, David. We lived in a trailer with no electricity half the time. I swore I'd never let anyone take from me again." But David was unmoved, his expression hardening as he lifted one of the photographs high for everyone to see. "This is Richard Blackwood, my stepfather. The man you married when I was 12, he said clearly, his voice echoing through the stunned silence as Margaret flinched visibly, the photo clearly striking a nerve that no one, not even she, could hide from anymore. "He died in a car accident 5 years ago." "Except it wasn't an accident, was it, Mother?" David said, his voice now carrying the slow, deliberate weight of a closing argument. "You sabotaged his brakes because he discovered your money laundering operation and threatened to turn you over to the FBI." The silence that followed was absolute, so complete it felt like the world itself had paused. The only sounds were the soft whir of the news camera still recording and a shaky voice in the crowd whispering into a phone. "I'm calling 911. Margaret looked around frantically, her eyes darting in every direction as if willing an escape route to open up, but there was none. She was surrounded by neighbors who now looked horrified, officials frozen in place, and news crews capturing her unraveling in real time. "The woman you know as Margaret Blackwood," David continued, voice steady and gaining strength, "is actually Melissa Grant, a fugitive who's been on the FBI's most wanted list for over 15 years. She's a master of reinvention, a woman who disappears, changes her name, her backstory, and starts over somewhere new." He held up another document, this one thicker and stamped with federal markings. "This ranch Mr. Morrison's family property isn't just a piece of valuable farmland. It holds evidence that could send my mother to prison for life. She's been searching for it for years, ever since she learned it existed." The crowd was stunned, hanging on every word, and I could see reporter Alex Chun scribbling furiously while his cameraman zoomed in. likely realizing this was no longer just a rural zoning drama, but a national scandal in the making. But as I watched David, something felt off. His poise too perfect, his timing too exact, his evidence too conveniently damning. And then I saw it. A black government sedan parked discreetly a few houses down, marked only by a small federal plate. I recognized the driver, Agent Sarah Chun, one of the FBI's top field operatives. That's when the final piece clicked into place. David Blackwood wasn't just an estranged son seeking closure. He was an undercover FBI agent, embedded deep, playing a role with meticulous precision, and this entire confrontation had been orchestrated from the start. Melissa seemed to realize it too, her expression turning hollow as the last pillars of her false life crumbled. And just before the agents moved in, David turned to me with a quiet gravity that froze my blood. "Mr. Morrison, your grandfather wasn't just protecting witnesses or hiding family heirlooms. He was safeguarding something far more dangerous. He was specifically protecting evidence of my mother's crimes, including $50 million in hidden cash that she's been trying to recover for the past 3 years," David said, his voice grim. That number hit like a thunderclap, sparking a wave of fear and confusion through the crowd. People murmured, glanced at each other, and backed further away from Melissa, whose expression had settled into something cold and knowing. But the real shock came when we followed David and Agent Chun into the underground facility. Beneath my grandfather's garage, a place few people even knew existed. We descended into the bunker expecting answers, expecting to find the fortune or at least some trace of it. Instead, we found only bare concrete, echoing footsteps, and the blaring wail of triggered alarms. "This is impossible," Agent Sarah Chen muttered, stepping out from behind the barn where she'd been stationed, drawn by David's signal. "The money was secured here just 3 months ago. Our surveillance confirmed it." But before anyone could respond, a voice sharp, mocking, and ice-cold cut through the barnyard like a blade. Melissa Grant, no longer pretending to be Margaret, stood at the edge of my property with the calm arrogance of someone who had never lost control. "Did you really think I didn't know about your little FBI boyfriend, David?" she called out, her voice clear and deliberate. "Did you think I wouldn't notice my own son was wired for the past 2 years?" The horror of her words spread like fire. This wasn't David springing a trap on Melissa. This was Melissa luring the FBI into one of her own. She had used David's investigation against him, feeding the Bureau just enough truth to bait them into revealing their hand and leading them straight to this location. "The money was never the real target," Agent Chen said into her radio, her voice suddenly tight with urgency. "She wanted this. She wanted us all here, exposed and vulnerable." That's when we heard them, the rumble of vehicles from every direction, not the familiar sound of government cars, but something heavier, darker. Military-grade trucks, armored, moving with chilling precision. "David, get everyone away from the bunker now," Chun yelled, drawing her weapon. But it was already too late. Melissa's real team had arrived, and this time they weren't wearing animal control uniforms or carrying clipboards. They were here for war. These were the same men who had posed as harmless hunters during Melissa's initial visit, only now they were armed with high-powered weapons and moving with the discipline and coordination of a professional military unit. My stomach dropped as I realized we were on the verge of a full-blown firefight. 50 FBI agents, Agent Chun muttered into her radio. But she wasn't calling for reinforcements. She was activating the reinforcements that had already been embedded. Operation Morrison Ranch is a go. The moment those words left her lips, the entire landscape erupted with movement. From seemingly nowhere, federal agents emerged like ghosts rising from ditches, stepping out from behind trees, and appearing from within sheds and barns I'd believed were empty. It was like a tactical magic show unfolding in real time, but the performers were elite agents armed and ready. The barn that once stored old farm tools now spilled out a dozen agents in full tactical gear. My tool shed, home to a lawnmower and garden supplies, slid open to reveal a state-of-the-art communications center alive with screens and encrypted signals. Even my chicken coop had been retrofitted to house hidden surveillance. Equipment that had been tracking Melissa and her crew the entire time. "You see, Melissa," Agent Chun called out across the open field, her voice no longer urgent but commanding. "Steady with the weight of victory. We've been waiting for you to make this move for 3 years. Every step you've taken, every plan you've hatched, we've been 2 steps ahead the entire time." David stepped forward, pulling what I had assumed was just a wire, but now saw clearly was a high-end FBI transmitter broadcasting everything. "In real time, the money you're after?" he said coolly, addressing Melissa not as a son but as an agent. "It was moved to a secure federal vault 6 months ago. What you walked into today was never about recovering stolen cash. We left the bunker accessible on purpose because we knew you'd come back and you wouldn't come alone." The atmosphere turned electric as both sides squared off Melissa's private army, armored and heavily armed, facing down a fully deployed FBI tactical force. It felt like the opening sequence of a blockbuster thriller, except this was no movie. There were no stunt doubles, no reset buttons. These were real weapons, real agents, and real consequences, and Melissa's team, though better equipped, had just realized they'd walked into a trap perfectly engineered to end the chase once and for all. But Melissa's team, despite their superior firepower and tactical coordination, had walked straight into a battlefield they didn't control, surrounded by federal agents who knew every inch of the terrain and had been preparing for this exact confrontation for months. Meanwhile, the Channel 7 news crew, which had come expecting a dramatic but relatively contained property dispute, suddenly found themselves at the center of what would soon be recognized as one of the largest organized crime takedowns in state history. This is Alex Chun reporting live from the scene of what appears to be a massive, multi-agency FBI operation, the young reporter announced breathlessly into the camera, fully aware that he was capturing career-defining footage. But amid the chaos and unfolding arrests, the most remarkable part wasn't the sting itself, it was the overwhelming response from the community. Instead of retreating from the danger, the residents of Highland Estates arrived in waves, forming a human shield of resolve and civic pride. They positioned their vehicles to block off roads and choke off any chance of escape for Melissa's mercenaries. At the center of this effort was Dorothy Walsh, who had somehow rallied dozens of neighbors into a coordinated perimeter effort, not to interfere, but to assist, standing shoulder to shoulder with the FBI. "We're not going to let criminals tear down what we've built," she declared boldly, and her words lit a fire under the community. Maria Santos and her teenage son took charge of traffic, creating lanes for emergency responders while shutting down all escape routes. Even residents I had never spoken to before were jumping into action, bringing food, flashlights, first aid supplies, and raw determination. It wasn't just a federal sting anymore, it was a neighborhood reckoning. Melissa, once composed and untouchable, now stood boxed in by a force far greater than she had ever anticipated, not just law enforcement, but a united front of ordinary people refusing to be pawns in her long con. Her face twisted in rage, her control slipping as she shouted wildly, "You think you've won? This is just the beginning. You don't know how deep this goes or who else is involved." But no one was listening anymore, not the agents placing her in cuffs, not the reporters filming her collapse, and certainly not the neighbors who had turned her final act into a symbol of defiance. As FBI teams took her and her operatives into custody, capturing every moment for a stunned national audience, it became crystal clear that Melissa Grant's reign of manipulation, fear, and deception had finally come to an end. She had tried to destroy my family's legacy, poison an entire community with fear, and slip away one more time, but in the end, she underestimated the resolve of a town that stood up for each other and the relentless will of those sworn to protect it. 3 weeks after that historic arrest, I finally understood what Melissa's last words really meant and why the FBI would need at least 6 more months to untangle the vast, hidden web she left behind. The woman who had terrorized our community and tried to erase my family's legacy was just one node in a sprawling criminal network that reached far beyond Highland Estates, a network so vast it stretched across the entire country and beyond. In the weeks following the arrests, Agent Sarah Chen visited me often, sitting at the same kitchen table where my grandfather had once mapped out his own quiet stand against corruption, now repurposed as the command center for unraveling one of the largest financial crimes in U.S. history. Melissa Grant, it turned out, was a high-ranking operative in an international money laundering syndicate responsible for creating over 200 fake residential communities across the United States. Each one served as a front to funnel millions in illicit profits disguised as legitimate real estate development into the global financial system. Highland Estates wasn't an isolated case. It was a single tile in a mosaic of criminal sophistication. We've identified at least 15 other Margaret Blackwoods operating in various states, Agent Chun told me one evening, her voice low but resolute. Each one following the same script, targeting strategically valuable properties, manipulating local communities, and using legal threats to suppress resistance. The deeper the investigation went, the darker it became. Highland Estates had been built using money traced back to drug cartels, human trafficking rings, and multi-layered fraud schemes that linked criminal enterprises across 3 continents. But the most tragic part was the innocence of the families who had unknowingly bought homes there, people who had invested their savings and dreams into a neighborhood they believed was safe. The FBI launched a parallel operation to protect those homeowners, ensuring they wouldn't lose everything while systematically dismantling the financial web that had supported the operation. And then there was David Blackwood, or rather, Agent David Rodriguez, a man whose entire identity had been a masterclass in undercover infiltration. For 2 years, he convinced Melissa that he was the son she had abandoned, immersing himself so completely in that fabricated role that even Melissa, a master manipulator, never suspected the truth. He studied every detail of her real son's life, who had died tragically in a car crash years earlier, and constructed an emotional narrative convincing enough to deceive a seasoned criminal. It was the hardest assignment of my career, David admitted during a quiet debriefing at my place, his eyes betraying the emotional toll. But after everything she'd done, how many families she destroyed, including her own, was the only way to bring her down. His courage and psychological endurance helped the FBI secure arrests in 12 states and recover more than $300 million in stolen assets. It was justice not just for my family, but for hundreds of others who had no idea they were part of a long-running criminal illusion, and it all started on a piece of land my grandfather had once sworn to protect, but entire communities exploiting trust and using fear as a weapon to manipulate neighborhoods for personal gain. Her sentencing marked the end of a dark era, but for Highland Estates, now officially renamed Morrison Community, it symbolized a powerful rebirth. The transformation began swiftly after her arrest, led by the very people she had underestimated. Dorothy Walsh, whose calm courage and unwavering integrity had guided neighbors through the chaos, was overwhelmingly elected HOA president, receiving 95% of the vote from a community now awakened to the difference between leadership and control. Her first act was bold and symbolic, proposing the name change to Morrison Community in honor of the family that had protected the land for 5 generations. The vote passed unanimously. Maria Santos launched a community garden initiative that quickly became a weekly tradition where planting vegetables grew into building friendships. Her son, once just a helpful teen around my ranch, took on a greater role, becoming the link between my agricultural roots and the neighborhood, designing programs to teach kids about farming, ecology, and responsibility. As for me, my life changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The operation's story captured national attention, drawing interview requests from news networks and documentary filmmakers. But I declined the spotlight, choosing instead to preserve the legacy of my grandfather by giving Morrison Ranch a but I declined the spotlight, choosing instead to preserve the legacy of my grandfather by giving Morrison Ranch a but I declined Morrison Ranch up new purpose. With support from the FBI and neighbors, I transformed part of the land into an educational center focused on sustainable agriculture and community safety. The underground bunker, once used to hide evidence and protect federal witnesses, was converted into a museum, chronicling the long fight against organized crime and celebrating the role that ordinary citizens played in achieving justice. Emma Rodriguez and I, once college friends reunited by crisis, had grown closer during those months. What began as professional collaboration slowly deepened into a relationship built on mutual respect, shared values, and an unshakable commitment to service. She opened a legal clinic at the community center, offering free guidance to residents, dealing with property disputes, immigration hurdles, or legal confusion that too often left working families vulnerable. Together, we worked to build a future where the Morrison community would never again be so easily deceived, equipping residents with the knowledge, confidence, and unity to spot manipulation before it could take root. The final chapter of Melissa Grant's story ended in federal court, where she was sentenced to 45 years in prison for money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and being an accessory to the murder of her husband. The judge called her actions a betrayal of trust on a national scale, reminding the court that true justice lies not just in punishing the guilty, but in restoring hope to the communities they tried to destroy. She didn't just betray a few. individuals, she shattered the trust of entire communities that had once looked to her for safety, progress, and prosperity. During the sentencing hearing, victims from 6 different states came forward, sharing painful stories of how her fraudulent organizations devastated their neighborhoods, drained their life savings, and undermined their belief in the very institutions meant to protect them. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, there was resilience. They spoke of rebuilding brick by brick, learning to recognize manipulation and red flags, and ultimately creating stronger, more united communities forged through the fire of shared struggle and recovery. Today, as I sit on my front porch watching chickens wander peacefully across the yard my great-great-grandfather once cleared by hand, I reflect on the values my grandfather instilled in me about land stewardship, accountability, and the deep-rooted power of community. Morrison Ranch isn't just land that grows eggs and vegetables. It's a living symbol of what ordinary, determined people can achieve when they come together to defend their future and refuse to be silenced by fear. At the local community center, we now host regular workshops that teach residents how to detect financial scams, spot counterfeit legal documents, and organize neighborhood watch groups that keep each other safe from exploitation. With over 500,000 subscribers following our educational content on community resilience and sustainable agriculture, I know my grandfather would be proud that his final mission has grown into a protective force far beyond our quiet stretch of countryside. Have you ever felt helpless in the face of someone who seems to control everything, whether it's a vindictive neighbor, a corrupt leader, or a manipulative boss? We all know that fear, but this story is proof that even someone like Jake, just an ordinary guy, can stand tall, outwit abusers, and protect what truly matters when he finds the strength to build alliances and never back down. If you've ever believed that real justice happens when people stand together with courage and clarity, then this story is for you, because sometimes the only thing more powerful than the hurt we endure is how we rise together and take back what's ours.